SpaceX and Boeing are working on sending their first human mission into space next year. Meanwhile, NASA is getting ready to go back to the moon. These are exciting times for the space industry, and the Space Coast is center stage. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. I sat down with Florida Today's space reporter Emre Kelly this week. We talked about Elon Musk's vision of establishing a Mars colony and how the industry has advanced since the end of the shuttle program in 2011. Emre Kelly, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you have basically the most exciting beat here at Florida Today, covering space and the space industry. How long have you been doing this for?
About a year and a half, just as a reporter, but before that, more online work, so it's been about 4 years.
And you cover a lot of launches. Any idea how many launches you've covered in the past year and a half?
Year and a half, probably it's going to end up being maybe around 40, I would say.
Wow.
30 to 40.
Busy schedule. So I want to start our conversation about what's going on this year and what are the big missions that we're going to see before the end of the year, and what are we going to start seeing in 2019?
So before the end of the year, there are no more left in November. That's it for the month. December 2nd, so Sunday, there's going to be a launch from California, which isn't a big deal locally, but it kind of is in a way. It's a SpaceX Falcon 9, but it'll be the first time they launch the same rocket 3 times. So that rocket successfully flew 2 previous missions, landed on drone ships twice. Now it'll take its 3rd mission, which is a big deal. That'll be the first time one of their rockets ever does that. And hopefully, if it all works out and it checks out, they might use it a 4th time and a 5th time, and who knows, 10, 20, 30 times. We'll see how much they want to use it. That rocket is also the first SpaceX rocket to launch from all 3 of their pads, 2 here in Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, and 1 in California. It is also the 19th mission of 2018 for SpaceX. So that's the most number of launches they've had in a calendar year.
Wow.
So, and there are.
And where is this one going specifically?
You mean like what's the payload on the rocket? So that's another record. 64 small satellites are going to be launched from it to essentially a bunch of different positions. A lot of those satellites are university satellites or small satellites contracted by other countries and whatnot for research purposes or technology demonstrations. So it's a pretty almost a lot of aspects of the mission are record breaking.
And just before we started recording, we were talking about how SpaceX and Boeing are working on a crew mission. What is the status of that? What are they going to do once they reach space? And is there a timeline for when that launch is going to happen?
So 2019 should be the year that we start seeing uncrewed and crewed demonstration flights. They're both demonstration flights. Uncrewed and crewed are still going to be demonstration. So SpaceX currently is on target for January 7th to launch their uncrewed flight to the International Space Station. That will basically be a test mission, right, to make sure that it's safe to fly a crewed flight. Later in the year, possibly as soon as June, they'll fly their crewed demo flight from here. These are all from here, by the way. Then you have Boeing, which is doing the same thing. They've been tasked, with taking astronauts to the International Space Station privately with a NASA contract. Their uncrewed flight should be in March, and their crewed flight should be no sooner than August.
That is very exciting. And who are these people who are going to be flying? Do we have an idea who they are, and what do they have to go through?
Right, so the astronauts have already been selected. Obviously, for the first demo flights of each company, there's no one on board, but for the crewed demonstration flights, and then later on the operational flights, the astronauts have been announced. One of them, for example, for Boeing is Chris Ferguson. He's a very well-known astronaut. He is Boeing's, I believe, best way to put this, Boeing's first astronaut. He's not a NASA astronaut, he's a commercial, 100% commercial astronaut. I mean, he flew for NASA before, but that's still kind of interesting. So yeah, we know all the astronauts. There are several, Josh Cassada, Eric Bowe, Nicole Mann, for example, but they're all split up differently based on the crewed demo flight, and then after that, there's going to be an operational flight as well, and they've been split up according to their skills and what they would learn from each one.
That's going to be the first human flight leaving the United States since 2011, right?
Yeah, since July 2011.
When the last shuttle
launched in July 2011. So if we say, for example, SpaceX does launch its crewed demo flight in the summer, that will have marked 8 years since the last crewed flight from U.S. soil.
And since 2011, the United States has depended on the Russians to launch astronauts into space. Do you see us not depending so much on those international partnerships, or do you still see there'll be sort of like a mix in the future?
I mean, the idea is to get U.S. astronauts launching from U.S. soil. It gets a little complicated. For example, if something goes wrong or something happens in spaceflight, it's always nice to have a backup. Something goes wrong here, it'd probably be nice in the future to have a Russian rocket just in case. So that's certainly not a bad thing. But as far as international partnerships go, those are all over the board, from science missions to NASA's in the future Space Launch System rocket. So those are still there, that they will still exist.
And let's talk about the moon. Last time that we landed on the moon was 1972. Last year, President Trump signed a directive telling NASA to go back to the moon with an eye toward going to Mars. What has happened since? Where do we stand on going back to the moon? And we're talking about NASA, but we're also talking about all these private companies that have been very innovative in their own ways, right?
Yeah, so as far as the moon goes, and Mars for that matter, I'd say the best way to look at it is, divided up between commercial and NASA. NASA, as you said, has been directed to go to the moon before Mars. They want to build like an orbital platform around the moon so they can refuel spaceships and then go to Mars. To be honest, I think most folks should probably just one step at a time. NASA needs to launch that rocket first, the Space Launch System, which is now scheduled for 2020, 2021. It could push again or not, could launch on time. So that rocket needs to launch first, and then the same thing with SpaceX and Elon Musk.
Is that rocket going to be crewed or just a?
So the very first launch of SLS, Space Launch System, would be uncrewed.
Okay.
It'll orbit the moon. They need to launch it and test it and make sure everything works before they start sending humans back out into space on an official NASA rocket. But there's still a ways to go for that. And there's still a ways to go for SpaceX too. They have not yet launched a human being from Earth to space. So that needs to happen first. So really the biggest milestone, the next big thing, is humans launching again from US soil, and that'll lay the groundwork and sort of refine timelines in the future.
But SpaceX says that it wants to launch its first mission to the moon as early as 2023. To me, that doesn't seem like a lot of time. We're practically in 2019. Do you think that timeline is realistic?
I think it's a good goal to have. I think if it keeps things moving quickly for them, great. Like I said, they need to launch a human being first, and they're most likely going to do that next summer. If they can get that out of the way, get more experience launching people, they'll learn more things from that. I'm sure by 2023 they'll have a lot accomplished by then with the new rocket they want to launch. That rocket has yet to even go through testing, so that also needs to happen first. So as these milestones happen, the timelines will become more refined. But 2023, it would be interesting to see it happen in 2023. I might be a little surprised if it does, but yeah.
So your bet is that it doesn't happen that early, it seems.
My bet is that by 2023, we'll see a lot of progress on it.
And the first passenger on this SpaceX mission, right, will be this Japanese billionaire. His name is Yusaku Maezawa. And he wants to bring artists with him who will look at the moon and then come back and do some sort of artwork. Can you explain, how did this billionaire become involved in this project, and what are his ambitions?
So he, if I remember correctly, in Japan, earned his wealth by building sort of the Amazon of clothing, and he's working on a current project there that involves being able to use your phone to get body measurements and just
Yes.
order clothes online that way. So, but he's also been very well known for having huge art collections and investing heavily in art museums and organizations and things of that nature. So he loves art. So it makes sense that he'd want to take artists with him on this trip. In order to get the trip, he did invest a lot of money in SpaceX. They didn't say exactly how much. A lot, definitely in the millions, maybe more than 100 million or 200 million, who knows.
And he's worth just over $2 billion.
He's definitely a billionaire. I don't know his exact net worth, but he it makes sense that he'd want to take I believe 6 to 10 artists with him from a range: architects, photographers, filmmakers, painters, writers, things of that nature. And yeah, like he said, they would come back after orbiting them. They're not going to go to the moon. They're not going to the surface of the moon. They would orbit the moon and come back. And based on what they see, and perhaps if they can take up some equipment with them, cameras or anything of that nature, based on what they capture there, they can come back and create works of art from that. So
That should be
it's interesting. Yeah.
And the one thing that's interesting to me, and I don't follow space all the time, but we have all of these billionaires who got into the space industry. You have Elon Musk, you have Mr. Miyazawa, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and they're the ones who are fueling this industry. And it seems to me that they just have an interest in space, or do they see this as something that can make them even richer? What is their revenue model? Because obviously these are very savvy people who are not just going to do this because it's a pipe dream. Or
Right.
maybe that's the case.
I think it depends on the company you're talking about. SpaceX is a little more mature now. It doesn't really require, Elon to spend $1 billion a year to keep it floating. It functions on its own. It gets loans from well-known banks to obviously pay back in the future. It gets investments from people, and they have obviously to this point dozens and dozens and dozens of actual launch contracts. So SpaceX is pretty mature, and they're floating on their own, if you will, and NASA has helped them get there with billions in contracts and whatnot. But then you have like Blue Origin under Jeff Bezos, which has secured a couple contracts, but Jeff Bezos himself said, till the day I die, I could just spend $1 billion a year on Blue
Wow.
Origin if I wanted to and keep it afloat. And he does have a bit of a dream of wanting industry in space, but then having Earth be home, if you will. Elon wants to colonize, just go
Mars.
farther, whether it's the moon or Mars, he just wants to colonize. And he talks about Mars a lot, but he also wants to go to like Titan and all these other places. Same goes with Virgin Galactic. It's not like they're swimming in a million contracts either, but that's the way it works in the beginning. You need that infusion of cash.
And someone with a lot of
Right,
cash.
and with a lot of cash to get it started, like SpaceX in the beginning, but once they start getting those contracts and start showing consistency, then things get a lot better.
And I mean, Elon Musk obviously has a larger than life personality and a lot of times controversial. And you have Jeff Bezos, who is a lot more, I guess, low key, one can argue. Are they really competitive with each other, to your knowledge, given that they're both here on the Space Coast and they're both millionaires, young, self-made men? I mean, how is that dynamics between the two?
Between the two companies, like I said, SpaceX is a lot more mature. They've got the contracts come in. They have a lot of PR inertia, if you will. It's not like SpaceX is hurting for popularity or anything like that. But between the two people themselves, between Bezos and Musk, I've heard there are of course competitive elements to it, and Bezos does have the advantage of being the wealthiest person in the world. If Blue Origin can't be profitable for 20 years or something like that. You can just continue putting money into it. Perhaps SpaceX doesn't have that same level of flexibility, but it's just a different business, and in a way that makes them a little more, perhaps, a risk, opening themselves up to risk and taking a chance on bigger things.
And another project that SpaceX is working on is called Starlink, which is and you've just reported on this, is a mega constellation of thousands of internet beaming satellites in the Earth's orbit. Can you explain what that means? And I think it's going to be very transformative for how we get internet in the future, right?
Yeah, so if it all goes according to plan, what SpaceX and several other companies, OneWeb Satellites, which is actually here as well, going to manufacture satellites here at Kennedy Space Center, they want thousands of satellites of their own in low Earth orbit, beaming internet down, internet connectivity. So the difference would be you have cable internet at home. Some folks, elsewhere have DSL or anything like that, and you require a hardwired connection to get that. This would essentially make it wireless, basically, from space. And when you think about it, there are some pretty, when it comes to internet and hardline internet, there's a lot of infrastructure there that needs to be maintained and kept up, and there's a lot of agreements between government, and the county does this.
And a monopoly in a lot of places,
right,
where you can only get, like we were just talking about, an AT&T or
right,
Bright House.
And in a lot of places, you might only have one option or perhaps two options, but you look and they're the same price and they're the same performance. That's part of it as well, but even if SpaceX launches this constellation, let's say they only get 10% of the global internet market, or 5%, that's got to be a significant amount of money. And if Starlink is as successful as they're hoping, internet connectivity should, it won't cost $400 a month or anything like that. It would be pretty reasonable. It might even be competitive with your local internet. And it might drive prices down and just a whole slew of other things. But again, most importantly for SpaceX, it could be pretty lucrative for them and pretty much hopefully fund their their moon projects, Mars projects, other rockets down the line. So, and you would access that with a little laptop terminal.
So will the next moon launch leave from the Space Coast, or is that still up in the air?
The next launch to the moon, that's probably still up in the air. If we're talking about an orbit of the moon, if NASA stays on track and Space Launch System launches, 2020, 2021, that time frame, then the next launch that will orbit the moon will be from here. It'll be from Kennedy Space Center. And that'll be the Space Launch System's first ever launch. It'll orbit, do a couple tests up there, come back for a splashdown. So the chances are definitely greater that the first launch, in this case to orbit the moon, will be from here.
And that's going to be manned or unmanned?
That would be
uncrewed.
Uncrewed,
okay.
Yep.
I know I keep using the term manned. I know it's not politically correct. And let's talk about Mars. You recently reported that NASA's InSight mission just touched down on Mars recently, and it's going to spend 2 years studying the planet. What kind of information are they looking for, and how will that information help us down here, and what's the purpose of it?
That one is very scientific in nature. Not so much. It's not so much a scout for like future missions to Mars. I mean, they all are in a way, but this one is designed to study more the interior of Mars, study Mars quakes, they call them, things of that nature. And if they can maybe understand a little bit more about Mars and how it formed and where it is today, maybe they can glean data that'll help us understand how Earth formed and how other planets in the solar system formed, perhaps even outside the solar system. But as with most spacecraft today, they don't just have like one instrument or one little drill or anything. There's dozens of instruments, thermometers and pressure sensors and all that stuff that will, I'm sure, give them, and it's more modern obviously than spacecraft currently there. So it'll give them more accurate information, better information, and help with their mission and understanding it.
And hopefully one of the few steps towards a colony in the future. It was interesting. I was reading an interview with Bill Nye, the science guy, saying that we'll never get a colony in Mars. That's basically stuff of science fiction. Um, what do you think about? Is that something that people actually believe could happen one day, or is that just some sort of pie in the sky type of dream by Elon Musk?
I mean, I would say it's fair to say nothing is impossible, especially if you look at humanity 100 years ago. If you showed a random person your phone, they would probably be blown away. But there are some scientific facts about Mars that would make, and Bill Nye was primarily referring to terraforming Mars. Living there, living out the rest of your days on Mars, possibly being able to walk outside, and breathe the Martian air, that is a very difficult thing to accomplish, if not impossible. But Musk's vision of Mars, at least currently, I'm sure someday he'd love it if he could terraform Mars. But currently he wants, domes, if you will, buildings, colonies there. So self-contained environments, if you will. And he wants humans to live there. And Bill Nye's argument is that perhaps most folks aren't going to want to live and die on Mars, where there are no amenities, there's so far nothing to do. But Elon's betting on the different side of the spectrum. Bill Nye's not saying let's not go to Mars. He's saying let's send folks to Mars temporarily, then they can come back. Elon is saying, sure, we can do that, but we can also send people to stay there forever.
It'd be very interesting when he's like the first person who was born outside of the planet, and then you're gonna have all these issues when they come back here. Are they gonna be considered immigrants? I mean, I can sort of see all those issues that we don't foresee happening. But I want to move on about the Space Coast. And in 2011, when we had the last shuttle mission and the space program basically downsized to a level of that, many people thought this would be the death of the Space Coast as it is. Our area became economically depressed, and in the last 6 years, seems like we have recovered a lot. So what has prompted all the new change in the space program, and how are we doing today in terms of a region that's dependent on space?
Well, in some ways, the transition to commercial space from the space shuttle was planned. Bush administration, the previous administrations, Obama, Bush, had those transition plans in place from when the shuttle ended. Obviously, they shifted and changed over time. But as far as being healthier here goes, it wasn't just space. Embraer makes jets, assembles jets in Melbourne. Northrop Grumman expanded operations here. That helps. Lockheed Martin expands operations here. It also helps that the history is here as well. The first moon missions launched from here, all the Apollo missions launched from here. And there is a certain allure of being able to launch your rocket, in this case SpaceX, from the same pad that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins launched from. So, but there are also some important technical reasons. I mean, Cape Canaveral is an ideal launch location for a lot of reasons. But most importantly, the billionaires, the companies are coming. They're here, and Blue Origin is, for the first time, I believe, in the history of the Space Coast, building rockets here as well as launching them here. That didn't always happen in the past. So, I believe most folks would say it's not today the level it was in 2011 or 1990 or during the height of the Apollo era, but it's certainly better than it was 6 or 7 years ago.
And you brought up obviously a very important fact that Blue Origin is the first manufacturing plant for rockets here on the Space Coast. They got $8 million from the county to settle here. Where are they in terms of being fully operational here?
The factory, the rocket factory, is still, the factory itself is still being worked on. They're still going through permitting and items of that nature to get it ready. The office, the management office, the administrative part of that building is up and running. There are folks working there. They just sort of aren't ready to start building rockets there yet. But if you drive by today on Space Commerce Way, it's like, it looks like it's ready to go. You know, perhaps in a couple of years you'll see those big doors open and big old New Glenn roll out and go to Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 36 for liftoff. So.
And have you thought about when we get the next human mission from Cape Canaveral, have you considered the thousands of people who are just going to flock to our area? And I wonder if we have the infrastructure to accommodate all those people, the traffic and hotels and all of that. Do you think that we're ready for that level of influx of people and attention?
I think it would be, we're probably not, but it would be a little difficult to be ready for that because it's it happens only so many times. You know, you're not going to build 40 extra hotels just for one launch or 2 launches a year or anything like that. But the Falcon Heavy launch in February, the estimate was 100,000 or more people visited the Space Coast for that. And that wasn't even crewed, you know, it was a test launch. Obviously it
has Spaceman on it.
Yeah,
right?
it has Spaceman on it. Starman, yeah.
Starman.
Yeah. So that was crewed in its own way. But so, you know, if you say 100,000 people for all the big launches, that's it's going to be busy around here.
And it's going to be interesting for you as a reporter covering it, right?
Yeah. We should see hundreds of press out there as well.
And we're about to wrap up, but I want you to show your mug, your Spock, the many emotions of Spock from Star Trek.
Many emotions of Spock mug. They're all the same face. Angry, tired, troubled, excited, envy, logical. They're all the same face.
Emre, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for I Am Brevard today. You can rewatch all of our episodes on Florida Today's YouTube channel. I'll see you again next week, and thank you for watching.